to criticize at length in an aggressive manner. So we've been slacking off. We have no self-defense. So he's probably using that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, isn't he? When the company separated and the papers were collected, we found about 1,200 signatures and other copies being dispersed in the country. The subscribers amounted at length to upwards of 10,000. These all furnished themselves as soon as they could with arms, formed themselves into companies and regiments, chose their own officers, and met every week to be instructed in the manual exercise and other parts of military discipline. The women, by subscription among themselves, provided silk collars, which they presented to the companies, painted with different devices and mottos, which I supplied. Thank you, Benjamin, for supplying those. So did Benjamin Franklin have any important effect on the development of self-defense and militia in the American colonies? Because this is in 1744. So the officers of the companies composing the Philadelphia Regiment, being met, chose me for their colonel, but conceiving myself unfit, I declined that station, and recommended Mr. Lawrence, a fine person and a man of influence, who was accordingly appointed. I then proposed a lottery to defray the expense of building a battery below the town, and furnished with cannon. It filled expeditiously, and the battery was soon erected, the merlons being framed of logs and filled with earth. A merlon. We bought some old cannon from Boston, but these not being sufficient, we wrote to London for more, soliciting at the same time our proprietaries for some assistance, though without much expectation of attaining it. So they did purchase some cannons, but they needed some more, wrote to London. Nah, probably not going to send them to us. But they went to New York to borrow some cannons from Governor Clinton. Quote, he at first refused us peremptorily, but at dinner with his council, where there was great drinking of Madeira wine, as the custom of that place then was, he softened by degrees, and said he would then lend us 6. After a few more bumpers, he advanced to 10, and at length he very good-naturedly conceded 18. They were fine cannon, 18-pounders, with their carriages, which were soon transported and mounted on our batteries, where the associators kept a nightly guard while the war lasted, and among the rest I regularly took my duty there as a common soldier. Now he was pretty excited about this militia bill, the self-defense bill, so he proposes a fast to mark the occasion. In the American spirit, he really ought to have proposed the feast, but he proposed a fast to mark the occasion. They, quote, embraced the motion, but as it was the first fast ever thought of in the province, the secretary had no precedent from which to draw the proclamation. My education in New England, where a fast is proclaimed every year, was here of some advantage. I drew it in the accustomed style. It was translated into German, printed in both languages, and circulated throughout the province. This gave the clergy of the different sects an opportunity of influencing their congregation to join the association, the militia association, and it would probably have been general among all but the Quakers if the peace had not soon intervened. So he says he translated it into German, and it was then printed in both languages and circulated. The German language was so popular and common among the early colonists that there was actually a vote on which language would make the official language of the new government, English or German. And actually I saw this on a poster of different historical decisions that came down to one vote. And that was one of the decisions. By one vote, all of our documentation, the Declaration of Independence and so forth, all of that's in English rather than German, by a vote. So that's how popular German was, and I don't know, is that because the Quakers were a German sect or something? They came from Germany? To the extent that I've heard religious history, I'm so biased I just block it out, so I have to consciously focus to try to pick up details about religious history. But anyways, continuing. Peace being concluded, and the militia business therefore being at an end, I turned my thoughts again to the affair of establishing an academy. The first step I took was to associate in the design in a number of active friends, of whom the junto furnished a good part. The next was to write and publish a pamphlet entitled Proposals Relating to the Education of Youth in Pennsylvania. This I distributed among the principal inhabitants gratis, gratis, and as soon as I could suppose their minds a little prepared by the perusal of it, I set on foot a subscription for opening and supporting an academy. So first he prepares the groundwork by writing a pamphlet, and he says some people have talked about it, they've discussed it with other people, there's a few people who have this idea in their head, and then he goes out and starts talking to people about it. And the way he proposes it was, quote, it was to be paid in quotas yearly for 5 years. By so dividing it, I judged the subscription might be larger, and I believe it was so, amounting to no less, if I remember right, than £5,000. So he has £5,000 pledged for people say, I'll give so much and so much per season or per month or whatever for the next 5 years. In the introduction to these proposals, I stated their publication not as an act of mine, but of some public-spirited gentleman. So he purposefully misled people into believing, quote, he says, avoiding, as much as I could, according to my usual rule, the presenting of myself to the public as the author of any scheme for their benefit. So he doesn't want to be a person going up there and saying, I've got a scheme that's going to help you all. Just, contribute something to it. He prefers a more humble approach. Say, there is a gentleman who believes this is a good scheme. Now, Ben perceives a great advantage in this. So they found a situation, quote, a house was hired for the academy, masters were engaged, and the schools opened, I think in the same year, 1749. The scholars increasing fast, the house was soon found too small, and we were looking out for a piece of ground properly situated, with intent to build, when accident threw into our way a large house ready built. They didn't even have to construct a place, quote, which, with a few alterations, might well serve our purpose. This was the building before mentioned, erected by the hearers of Mr. Whitefield. He tells the details of how it's obtained. So they needed trustees to run the thing, and, quote, one of each sect was appointed. So he mentions all of the sects, Church of England, Presbyterian, Baptist, Moravian, etc. And then, quote, the Moravian happened not to please his colleagues, and on his death they resolved to have no other of that sect. The difficulty, then, was how to avoid having two of some other sect by means of the choice. Several persons were named, and for that reason not agreed to. At length, one mentioned me, with the observation that I was merely an honest man of no sect at all. So he became board of trustees at the little school that he himself desired to have open, but presented as somebody else's project. Looks like he was just sort of carried along in the current of things, but he was the author. So, in the end, they worked out a whole thing to, quote, to keep forever in the building a large hall for occasional preachers, according to the original intention, and maintain a free school for the instruction of poor children. The whole was soon made fit for our purpose, and the scholars removed into the building. So they've acquired an actual building for their academy. The trustees of the academy, after a while, were incorporated by a charter from the governor. Their funds were increased by contributions in Britain, and grants of land from the proprietaries, to which the assembly has since made considerable addition. And thus was established the present University of Philadelphia. Now, he could take full credit for establishment of that, because he did it, but he made a policy all along the way of not taking credit. And we skip down a bit. By the sufficient, though moderate fortune I had acquired, I had found leisure during the rest of my life for philosophical studies and amusements. I purchased all Dr. Spencer's apparatus, who had come from England to lecture in Philadelphia, and I proceeded in my electrical experiments with great alacrity. But the public, now considering me as a man of leisure, laid hold of me for their purposes, every part of our civil government, and almost at the same time imposing some duty upon me. So he says, when I retired, people said, hey, he's got wealth, he's a man of of position.